love your neighbor, and so on and so on. I claim that we need, this is what in Christianity we call work of love. Work of love has to include some kind of violence. The whole point is what kind of violence. I would like to begin by the most elementary levels of insults. My good friend Alain Badiou, recently being accused of using insults, wrote something wonderful in a letter to Le Monde, I think. Here is the quote from Alain Badiou. What characterizes politics, even if capitalo-parliamentarism enforces its domination up to making us forget it, is that in politics there are enemies. And why, for devil's sake, if they are true enemies, should it be prohibited for me to insult them, to compare them to vultures, jackals, bulls, headless linnets, and even to rats, to vipers, fat or not, up to hyenas, literate or not. End of quote. Why do I agree with him? Because I think that the liberal prohibition of enemies, you know, there are no enemies, there are just competitors, and so on, has a very precise implication. If there are no true enemies, if there is no true struggle in politics, this means that those who really disagree with us are not simply our enemies, but are excluded from the very scope of humanity, so anything goes against them. Paradoxically, the first step in recognizing the very humanity of the enemy should be to fully accept the unavoidability of taking sides in politics. It is them or us. There is no third place above the struggle. For example, in 2008, Hugo Chavez, and I'm deeply critical of him. I think he's a failure already. Not external failure, but in itself, in his project, a failure. But nonetheless, I remember how in 2008, Chavez in Venezuela was accused of subordinating the judicial sphere to his executive power, of depriving courts of their independence. But the first thing one should ask upon hearing this accusation is, but which was the state of the judicial system Chavez was intervening into? Who dominated it politically? Was this system really a model of democratic neutrality? That is to say, I had some Lacanian psychoanalytic friends in Venezuela who told me, Chavez is horrible, he changed his constitutional court. I asked them, okay, what was the structure before? They admitted it was just another group, extremely partial, even worse than what Chavez is doing today. Then they added, but it should have been done in a democratic way. Well, why didn't they do it? I think that, you know, sometimes here you have to make hard choices. And effectively, that's the brutal logic of politics. Sometimes, how to put it, evoking democracy in such moments effectively means condoning the previous, much worse injustice. This is what I'm tempted to call the parallax lesson of terror. This parallax was rendered perfectly. Now you will say, but this is my European Jacobin perversity. No, it's one of you, of your authors, who put it in wonderful terms. None other than Mark Twain. Listen to these wonderful lines from Mark Twain's Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. He's, of course, told, answering to the criticism of those who rejected the Jacobin terror as horror and so on. Quote, it's one of yours, not European decadence. There were two reigns of terror, if we would remember it and consider it. The one wrought in hot passion, the other in heartless cold blood. One shudders, our shudders are all for the horrors of the minor terror, the momentary terror, so to speak. Whereas, what is the horror of swift death by the axe compared with lifelong death from hunger, cold, insult, cruelty, and heartbreak? A city cemetery could contain the coffins filled by the brief terror, which we have all been so diligently taught to shiver at and mourn over. But all France could hardly contain the coffins filled by that older and real terror, that unspeakably bitter and awful terror which none of us have been taught to see in its vastness or pity as it deserves. End of quote. So, if one deplores the Jacobin terror, if one does only that, one thereby says yes to that older and real terror. So that's the first thing I'm tempted to emphasize here. It's not a question, I hope you got it, it's not the question that I am advocating Jacobin terror, although de facto I am against that. But that's another story. No, if you know, let me give you my main reason, which may be weird to you, artistic. You know which is the painting of French Revolution. I hope you, most of us, know it. The famous Jean-Louis David painting, The Death of Marat. Did you notice the strange nature of that painting? It's, let's say this is the painting, the lower third, you have the bathtub, the dead Marat, and then the upper 2/3, you remember what they are? Nothing, just nothing. It's as if he precisely avoided that easy justification. How would this same painting be done, let's say, in a really totalitarian regime? We would have the dead Marat, but instead of seeing this darkness, it would have been filled probably, let's say, by a dream of the dying Marat. Happy French people dancing when the revolution will win. You don't find that there. It's a wonderful painting. Marat is almost squeezed into the frame. And I claim, and I agree here with Clark, the first one art historian who emphasized this, it's as it were, as if this is the first step towards later Malevich, or Black Square stuff, and so on and so on. I mean, it's a tremendous painting. So, okay, I'm trying to take, not to mention more obvious things like that. You know, stop with terror of the French Revolution and look at the statistics. In those couple of months of terror, less people were killed than just in a couple of weeks after the Terminor took over. The problem is just that the Jacobins chopped off a couple of high heads, king and so on, while hundreds were instantly killed afterwards. Who cares? There were nobody noticed it. Now I will make a step further, maybe even more problematic for you. What we should question here is a certain way of so-called anti-totalitarianism, which I find problematic, and I will try to explain why. I would like to take as the starting point the liberal enthusiasm for the so-called third wave phenomenon. Maybe you remember it. I am here referring to an event. I think it was in some California high school in the 60s, where, you know, it's the old story. A professor wanted to teach his students how was Nazism possible. So he told them, let's organize a society. Let's organize a movement called the Third Wave. The professor told his students that the motto of this movement will be strength through discipline, strength through community, strength through action, strength through pride. He disciplined them and so on and so on. And then he himself was shocked at how students, pupils, this was high school, started to collaborate. They even, without him asking his pupils, they even started to denounce to him some of others, you know, they don't really follow the rules and so on and so on. So he was so shocked that after 4 days, he convoked a meeting and told them, listen, this was all an experiment, it's a fake. I hope you now understand how easily it was to seduce people to become totalitarian. And then, of course, with liberals, you get a multiple orgasm. You see how the beast is lurking at any moment we can become. I totally reject this reading. I think that this experiment was deeply mystifying. And okay, I will not go into the detail. If you want a detailed analysis, read my next book. But my answer is simply this one. What is false in this experiment is that it opposes directly the so-called liberal, peaceful, tolerant openness and the universe of discipline, strength, action, and so on, throwing all that differs from liberalism.